Tomorrow will be a big day in Washington. Potentially the top job in the White House is at stake. All eyes will be on Congress, where witnesses in the impeachment inquiries will arrive for the first public hearings. Today, Democrats and Republicans are strategizing behind the scenes. The CBC's Ellen Morrow is in Washington with a look at Democratic and Republican strategies going into these hearings.
Well, for Democrats, Andrew, this is all about getting the information out there on TV for the entire country to see. They're essentially trying to build the case to the American people that the president, that those around him abuse their power for political gain. That's why they want these current and former top officials working on Ukraine policy in front of the cameras. These officials will say that this military assistance to Ukraine, much needed military assistance as Ukraine remains embroiled in a conflict with Russia that's killed some 13,000 people, was held up in an effort to force Ukraine to dig up dirt on Trump political rival Joe Biden. So it's about making that case in public. In terms of the messaging from the Democrats, expect them to move away from the phrase that we've heard a lot of over the past few weeks. That's the phrase quid pro quo, and instead use terms like extortion and bribery, trying to sort of simplify this and get TV-friendly sound bites. Now, on the Republican side, we're getting quite a clear idea of their strategy from this 18-page memo that was released from Republican staffers to Republican lawmakers this morning, outlining how they plan on defending the president, essentially saying that there's nothing to see here, that nothing impeachable happened, and that the investigation is a sham. Now, the big question here is whether or not any of this moves the needle enough so that Republican senators, if this does make its way to the Senate for a trial, actually have to consider going against the president, Andrew.
So what should we watch for in the coming days?
Well, this is going to be a spectacle for sure, historic. The first time we've seen live impeachment proceedings on Capitol Hill in about 2 decades. The hearings will happen tomorrow and Friday. We'll hear from the current top official in Ukraine, Bill Taylor, and his predecessor, Marie Yovanovitch, who says she was smeared by Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, before she was ousted from her post in the spring. They'll be questioned by Democrats and Republican lawmakers, as well as congressional lawyers. Now, also tomorrow, in what's set to be a really remarkable split-screen moment, we're expecting President Trump to hold his own news conference, a joint news conference with Turkey's President Recep Erdogan, who will be visiting him here tomorrow in D.C., Andrew.
The CBC's Ellen Morrow in Washington. For a closer look at the strategies at play, let's welcome John Allen in our Washington bureau. He is a national political reporter for NBC News who focuses on the presidency. John, nice to see you. So can you give us an idea of the defense we can expect to see tomorrow by Republicans?
It's good to be with you. I think you're going to see basically 3 defenses that I'd categorize as distract, destroy, and deny. And I think the way that they'll do that is they want to distract from the facts that the witnesses are going to present, each of which corroborates a piece of this story that Democrats say is extortion or bribery, basically, by the president to try to force Ukraine into opening an investigation into Joe Biden, one of the leading candidates against Donald Trump in 2020, by withholding funds for Ukraine. And then they'll want to destroy the decorum of these hearings, try to turn it into a little bit of a circus, and as well as destroying the witnesses personally. They're going to suggest that these witnesses have bad motives, and then they're going to deny that the president did anything wrong. And in addition to that, if anyone did anything wrong, it certainly wasn't him.
Is that a smart, effective strategy, the 3 Ds that you mentioned there?
It's what they've got. Right now, what everybody has seen is that there was a broad, wide-ranging scheme within the administration and even among some of the president's loyalists outside the administration, most notably Rudy Giuliani, his personal lawyer, to extract a promise from the Ukrainian president, Zelensky, to investigate Joe Biden and Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, and that the withholding of funds and perhaps the withholding of or the giving of a meeting with the president was part of that. And so all of the witnesses that are going to be brought out in public are going to testify to some piece of that larger scheme. And so what the Republicans are going to try to do is largely, I think, try to make it so that it doesn't appear that any individual witness can put all of it together. And they're going to do their best to make it seem that whatever the president did was not impeachable, something the House should not impeach him for, and certainly something that later on the Senate should not remove him from office for.
How has the president managed to keep Republican lawmakers on side through all of this? And do you expect that loyalty to continue through these hearings?
Those are two very good and very related questions. The answer to the first question is he's been able to keep them on board mostly out of the fear that these Republican lawmakers have over the fact that their constituents like the president more than they like them. And this is not something that's difficult to ascertain. When you go talk to Republican members of Congress, certainly on background, when they're not attaching their names to it, and sometimes when they do attach their names to it, they'll tell you the president is as popular in the Republican Party as anybody, more popular often than their own local congressman or congresswoman. And so there's a real fear of distancing themselves from the president. And also, he's well known for attacking people in his own party if they give an inch of daylight. And then so the secondary question becomes, if the only way that changes, the only way that he loses that loyalty is if there's a change in public sentiment, and particularly a change among Republicans, if Republican voters change on him.
Ahead of the hearings, you wrote that the Democrats need a clear message for voters. What do you think that message is, and do you think it'll resonate with voters where maybe the Mueller report did not?
Basically, the message that the Democrats are going to try to get across to voters is that the president prioritized his own personal political interests ahead of those of the national interests of the country, and that he did so in a corrupt fashion. And I think that their hope is that it will resonate better than the Mueller report did, in part because you're dealing with an election that was about to happen, the 2020 election, that's still on the front burner. And of course, the Mueller report was retrospective. It was something that I think dealt with an election that most people wanted to get past, and it was complicated by the fact that you had 400 pages and very little public testimony about it. There was a lot of difficulty that the Democrats had in getting witnesses to come before them, but in this case there were a lot more people who were willing to come forward who had access to information. So I think they think it's an easier story to tell, and one that the public will have an easier time digesting, in part because it's something that the public will be interested in because it deals with the future rather than the past. And
what's the potential, do you think, for Democrats to sway independent voters, moderate Republican supporters, to their side?
That's sort of the $64,000 question. The Democrats have two basic bites at the apple. One is to try to do that within the context of impeachment and whether or not the president is removed. And then the secondary question is if they're able to sway a significant number of independent voters but not get those Republicans they're trying to sway, or certainly not enough of them to get the Senate to oust the president, whether voters punish the president and his party at the polls next November because they feel like he wasn't held accountable for something that he did wrong.
You know, it was interesting, and I believe you told my producer, one of our producers, that you think that one of the dividends of this, if you believe in the new NAFTA deal, is the Democrats need to be seen as legislating while also investigating. I remember Nancy Pelosi on a key day in this whole process, talking about, well, maybe we will push through the USMCA, as it's called in the United States. Tell me a little bit. I know you're not a trade expert or anything, but tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's all sorts of trading going on, not just softwood lumber or dairy products, but also legislative products, and there's a tremendous incentive right now for both sides to be seen as being able to get things done that are in the interests of the American public, because there's a charge going from both sides that the interests of the public are being withheld in favor of partisanship. The Democrats charging the president with having done that in the effort to investigate Biden, and Republicans now charging Democrats with doing that in the impeachment. And so one of the byproducts of that is that you're seeing some movement on the USMCA, and Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, has been negotiating with President Trump on that, and certainly their staffs have been negotiating about it. And I think there's a lot of optimism here that that new NAFTA will get done, if not by the end of this year, perhaps early in the new year.
And even though not all Democrats support it, and that's kind of the irony of this, right? Because they have to be seen to be legislating in the interests of the country?
Absolutely, and it does not require most of the Democrats to get on board. What it requires is, because Donald Trump has such a hold on Republican members of Congress, he'll be able to get most of the Republicans on board. Nancy Pelosi will have to get a certain number of her Democrats to follow her to get it through, but it looks like they're headed in that direction.
Good to talk to you, John. Thank you.
You too.
NBC News national political reporter John Allen in Washington.